This is the Analysing Anfield podcast on the Blood Red channel, bringing you the best tactical and statistical analysis of Liverpool FC.
Hello everybody and welcome to the latest episode of Analysing Anfield. I'm joined by the usual man alongside me, David Hughes. How we doing, mate?
Very good, thanks, mate. I wish it was actually alongside you.
Yeah, so do I.
We still weren't doing this.
Yeah, I've had a few complaints over the sound issues because you talk, I talk, sort of thing. I've just been saying, and that's much better than the office. But anyway, Liverpool have signed a player. Huge news. Second time it's happened since me and Dave have been at Reach, which is quite a statement, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it's quite bizarre. What's the period? That's about over 18 months now. So
yeah, I think it's over 20 months, to be honest.
Yeah,
not sure.
Peculiar.
So we actually get. Go on.
Sorry, I was going to say on that. I think if I would have said to you, 20 months ago, Liverpool only signed 2 players, and the second will be 20 months from now. You wouldn't have had it, really, would you? You wouldn't have believed that for a second.
No,
I'm not criticising it.
Yeah, if when I started at Reach, I was to be told that from now on Liverpool will sign 2 players. But you'll win the Champions League, win the Premier League, win the Club World Cup. I'd be like, okay, didn't expect that, but yeah, last week we got led a little bit down the garden path. We expected Jamal Lewis to be the man, but that seems to have just been little more than smoke, because Liverpool have signed. Bear with me on this. I will improve when it comes to pronouncing his name. I'm sure Dave will probably be even worse. But I'm going to go with Kostas Tsimikas, I think is how you say it. Liverpool have signed him for 11.75 million. Reasonable fee. Supposed to be a backup for Andy Robertson by all accounts. So this is going to be basically probably a shorter episode, but a full episode really on him. What to expect from him, what he's like as a player. We appreciate that you've probably already listened to a lot of stuff on him. And I know the Echo have done quite a bit on him, various different podcasts, but we like to think that, we're going to give you something a bit different, considering, Analysing Anfield, different angles, analysis. We've got footage of him, we've got data on him. So hopefully we'll be able to give you a bit more insight, a bit different insight than what you've got from other podcasts. But we'll go right from the off. Was you surprised at all, Dave?
Yeah, I was, because he certainly wasn't a player particularly on my radar. But something weird happens when Liverpool are linked with the player. You kind of have this, I don't know, I guess this internal look at yourself where you think, hold on, why isn't he on my radar if he's on their radar? Because the chances are he must be a good player. I don't know if you can relate to that. But yeah, I was surprised, although obviously doing a little bit of work on him since, it's a move that makes sense. It looks like a good bit of business, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree on the player links thing. I mean, Liverpool have established a degree of respect over the years when it comes to signing players. You almost immediately think they're getting it right, regardless of who they're linked with. And this was a player, I will be honest, despite our roles, technically labelled as scouting writers, I'll be honest, this is a player I was not aware of. He hadn't really come on my radar at all. Obviously, a little bit unsurprising considering he's playing in the Greek Super League. The infamous Greek Super League. But yeah, he's performed surprisingly against Spurs, Arsenal, Burnley, Wolves, Bayern Munich. A fair amount of decent teams in the past 18 months or so in European football. But because of his home league and playing for Olympiacos, he hasn't really popped up on my radar. I think Daniel Podence was a player who I was aware of at Olympiacos. He's recently moved to Wolves in January. But other than him, I wasn't aware of the talent he had. Yeah. So this is obviously a player who's joining. Left back, 24 years old. in place of Jamal Lewis. I've got a little bit of a theory on this, by the way. Before we move into Tsimikas, I have a little bit of a theory on the Jamal Lewis thing. Maybe I'm giving Liverpool a bit too much credit, but I'm starting to think that the bids for Lewis, I mean, we bid 8 million plus 2 for Lewis. That is never getting accepted in a million years, really, is it? And, not long after it being rejected, it was quite swiftly Tsimikas' signing. And I'm thinking maybe it was a bit of a ploy from Liverpool to kind of present the image to, say, the likes of Watford, maybe, who have Sarr in the ranks. If Liverpool go in for your player, and you be unreasonable with the price, we're not going to mess about. And I think this deal kind of presents the image of Liverpool not messing about at all. If you try and charge extortionate fees in the current market with the coronavirus and stuff like that, Liverpool will just move on to whoever's second choice. So I think we knew all along, really, that we weren't going to get Lewis for that price. But I just think in terms of PR, it presents quite a healthy image that you will not be ripped off at all in this current market. I'm not sure if I'm giving the club a bit too much credit there, or whether I'm thinking too much into it, but I think it's quite a clever tactic if you actually think about it.
Yeah, it feels like it's played out like that at very least. On the back of them, from the outside looking in, switching targets. I'm inclined, in my opinion, more to think maybe they had a set valuation of both players in mind, and he probably opted for Lewis because he's got some of that Premier League experience. Maybe this is just my theory, but they've known that if they're not going to accept this offer, which is fairly low anyway, they've got another option that they're really keen on. And they could pursue that quite quickly if Norwich weren't going to play ball. Maybe if Norwich indicated they'd accept 12 million, Liverpool may have continued to pursue that. But I'm pretty sure they were saying, it's going to be a figure around 20 million. And Liverpool probably thought, well, we've got another target we really like there, and we can get him for 11, 12 million. So we'll switch to that. I don't know. As I said, it's really hard because all we're doing, isn't it, is trying to piece the pieces together from the outside. So knowing Liverpool, your theory could actually be true. But I'm more inclined to think it might be what I've just said there. But
yeah, it just seemed to. I think one of the reasons I think it is just because it seems to progress really, really quickly, and we seem to go from bidding for Lewis to actually announcing Tsimikas on the Monday night. So it seems to progress really quickly. If we did move from target A to target B, I was just thinking to myself, maybe target A was Tsimikas all along. We just wanted, publicity regarding target Lewis not being willing to pay a certain price, and then showing everyone that we're willing to move on immediately.
Yeah. What I will say, just quickly on that point, is we talked about Liverpool's alignment across the club before, and how it's really good. And I think what they do really well is just keeping their targets under the radar until the very latter stages of the deal process. I was listening to, I read an interview of Marcel Brands recently at Everton. He's like the director of football at Everton, for those who don't know. And he talked about the frustration he's had and the criticism of people internally within the club for leaking targets to the press or talking openly about targets to the press, and the issues that then arise on the back of that in terms of getting deals over the line. If you think recently they've had like Southampton midfielder Højbjerg, who they were really keen on. They've lost them to Tottenham. And now I'm not saying maybe the player was at some point on Tottenham's radar, but I think the minute as a club, another Premier League side is willing to, make that jump and go in and actually make a deal, you probably then look at yourself and think, hold on, are we missing out? And that might then push them to make a deal also, or at least an offer, I should say. Everton again, they had Gabriel at Lille. It looked like a deal was done there. but it's hit the press early on in the negotiation process, and now you've got the likes of Chelsea, Arsenal, United, Napoli, all being heavily linked. And I think the players now got a decision to make. And I think with Liverpool, you very rarely see that happen, do you? It can be really frustrating for us, in our role. Quite annoying, really. But from a kind of club perspective, I think it's really good, and it's the best way to do your business.
Yeah, no, it does. It does seem really watertight at the minute. I think Leicester were one of the clubs interested in Tsimikas actually. Maybe they were planning on bidding for him or whatever, but maybe Liverpool's interest became known really, really late, and it didn't give Leicester the time to make a move, sort of thing. So I think you've got a point there. I think Sevilla was supposedly interested, and I think Napoli have looked at him in the past. So maybe I think certain other players as well. I think of Fabinho. Fabinho got announced on the day. Nobody had any clue it was going to happen. Man United were linked with him at the time. I think there's really value in keeping your deals on the wraps until eventually done, basically. Which is why we jumped the gun last week for Lewis. But now we've signed Tsimikas. So Tsimikas, then let's address the player that we've bought. Despite the fact that we weren't previously aware of him, we do have all the numbers at hand. We do have the footage at hand, so we have run through his game. We're not experts, but we've got enough now on him to form an opinion, and an opinion that isn't just the absolute basic, like, he's left-footed.
That's what I was going to start with.
To be honest, that is one of my bullet points.
It's because it is actually quite important, but
it's absolutely crucial. It's crucial because the backup left back that we've had over the past few years has been right-footed in James Milner, and that's been an absolute nightmare. So I've shot myself in the foot there.
Oh, but it's a funny way to say.
Yeah. I will say before we start, those who listen to those who have signed up the Analysing Anfield newsletter, which I've been banging on about for the past 2 weeks, will already know plenty of this and will have got this in advance because a newsletter was sent out yesterday, simply titled "Is Kostas Tsimikas Good?" And it was just, I drilled down on the basics we picked up on him and that sort of thing. So if you haven't signed up, what are you playing at? Because you're behind the times. But again, if you want to go and do that, at Distance Cover on Twitter, find me and sign up at the top of my profile. But I think we'll start with the footage. What did you think watching, Dave? I mean, did you pick up on any aspects or?
Yeah, I'd say he seems to be very direct. I think with the ball, he seems to make a lot of overlapping, underlapping runs. Seems to be a lot of cross-heavy focus with his play. Looks to be a really good ball carrier. I've got numbers to back this up. This just from the clips I've seen, but he does. We were laughing about him being left-footed. He does seem pretty reliant on the left foot. I can't remember. I didn't see very many examples of him, taking many touches on his right or cutting in or using the same. Watching maybe dribbling sequences or anything, but I just thought he looked really good in terms of picking up the ball and driving and making runs from deep, and plenty of really decent crosses with the ball as well. I liked him. I thought he looked pretty agile, and I'm trying to avoid the really convenient comparison with Robertson, but you can see the similarities in the play, albeit for different teams.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if Liverpool have basically, after signing Robertson and seeing how well he's done, how suited he is to Klopp and stuff like that, I wouldn't be surprised if he now is just simply the benchmark sort of thing. Like me and you have used tools before, haven't we? At the likes of StatsBomb, where you can find similar players and stuff like that. I wouldn't be surprised if Liverpool have something like that at the club, and it's come down to just basically finding similar players to Andy Robertson, because I do think Tsimikas shows up as quite similar. In terms of the footage, Yeah, I mean, he's not lightning quick, but he's not slow either. He's just kind of like a little bit in between sort of thing. Like I'm thinking maybe the pace of like a Ben Chilwell, maybe something like that. Yeah, he's, as you say, quite direct. And with him being quite direct, for me at least, he came across a little bit. But this is probably the problem with my eyes, rather than being a problem with his game. But he come across as almost a little bit awkward in certain situations, a little bit not in control, even though he probably was. Salah can come across like that sometimes. Just those players who are a little bit rough around the edges, which Liverpool seem to like. Really, I think that's where data comes into it. I'm currently writing a piece on this actually. For those who have seen Moneyball, there's a scene in the Moneyball film where all the scouts are around the table and they're talking about how this baseball player looks physically, how he strikes the ball, his swing, the appearance of his jawline, all this nonsense that basically doesn't even apply to his actual output on the field. And I think Liverpool have been really good at picking up players who are, to a traditional scout who focuses on how clean a player strikes the ball or how technically is, the data can allow you to overlook that sort of thing. So yeah, he showed up to me a little bit rough. I'm not sure if you got that one.
Yeah, what I felt like that was it feels like he never fully always has control of the ball. He seems to be a player who is, when you think of ball carriers, there's different ways, isn't there? There's those who carry it close to the feet and kind of glide across. He seems to be someone who hits it hard and runs onto it and just big touches all the way. And I think that always looks a little bit like he's not always, in control of it. But I think that's the way he kind of generates his pace again, his power behind, behind the crosses and things. So yeah, that I think that does tend to look a little bit raw, but I guess it's just his style.
Yeah, I mean you've got players who are like very clean on the technical side. Like say for example the way Trent Alexander-Arnold strikes a football, you can just tell he's a really neat striker at the ball. Whereas if you look at Raheem Sterling hits a ball, or maybe even Salah hits a ball, it's like a little boy sometimes. But that doesn't mean they're bad players. But maybe traditional scouting would have picked up on that as a bit of a flaw. So yeah, I think in terms of his execution, the technical side of his game and some of his crosses, maybe they're not. It's not flawless execution. It's not really, beautiful to watch like it is when you see De Bruyne whip across into the box. Tsimikas seemed a bit, as I say, a bit rougher. But there's nothing really wrong with that. It's just going to be something that we're maybe going to have to get used to, and something that I don't overly think will hinder his game. He looks decent on the defensive side, 1v1 and that sort of thing. And he looks a little bit more ready-made, I thought, than Jamal Lewis. I think he's obviously 2 years older, Tsimikas, and played in European football and stuff like that. I think Lewis would have required, although he's homegrown and stuff like that, I think Lewis would have required a bit more work behind the scenes.
Yeah, I thought I noticed that I'd look earlier at 5'11", but I thought he was quite deceptively strong.
Yeah.
Now some of the more recent clips were, from the Wolves game, where he's up against Traore, and I thought he did okay. And it's hard to gauge in some of those brief domestic league clips, not to be disrespectful to the division. I think that there is some good sides and good players in there, but it's a little bit more difficult to gauge just how good he is in those matches against those players. But yeah, I thought he was deceptively a little bit stronger than I expected him to be honest. Defensive duel success rate was just around just under 60%, so not bad numbers wise for the fullback or wing back. Sorry, but yeah, I thought he looked okay in 1v1s, and he didn't seem to have for me anyway. He didn't seem to have a glaring weakness in them. Like he didn't seem to look like he struggled if a player cut in on one specific side or anything.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Yeah. In terms of his defensive numbers, again, any numbers that we that we put forward, it's going to be with the massive caveat that he's playing in the Greek Super League. So yeah, he might be facing, well, he will be facing better opponents in England, but he'll also be playing for a better team. So it depends what way you want to look at that. I suppose there's two ways. Just on that little thing that you just mentioned about him being deceptively strong or something like that you said. I think he had a bit of Robertson about him in terms of being a bit of a grafter and a bit of a fighter, if you know what I mean. Some players, when they get a knock, are inclined to just hit the deck and start crying, basically. But he come across as not really like that. He come across as a bit tough, for lack of a better word, which is probably good considering Klopp's brand of football and stuff.
Aggressive.
Yeah, aggressive. Yeah, and I think I've actually read that in terms of giving interviews and all that behind the scenes, he's not keen on the media side of it. He's just very much, let me play football, let me be a footballer, and then go home and stay beneath the surface, basically. So I think, although some people will be inclined to think that stuff doesn't matter, I think it probably bodes well for him, to be honest. The fact that he can, because I think that was a massive difference with seeing Robertson and Moreno. They were both really quick, both quite offensive and stuff like that. But Moreno just come across as really lightweight, and he was just really inclined to he was just really inclined to, I don't know, it's hard to explain, but he just hit the deck, and when you come across as a physically dominant team like Liverpool are now, he comes across as a weak link.
Yeah, he reminds me of someone who's just quite fragile, and I'm trying so hard to avoid the cliche lines here, but I think they articulate it best. You don't really see him getting his hands dirty. You could imagine if there's a bit of rough and tumble, he'd be falling to the floor and hands in the air, looking to the referee for the free kick, rather than just giving a little bit of it back. And
yeah,
with Robertson, you very rarely see that. You see someone who he almost embraces that side of the game, the sinister side, doesn't he? And I agree. I think obviously it's really hard. We haven't seen tons of. It's not like we watched hours of him, but just from what I've seen, it looks like maybe he's also the same in terms of maybe embracing that side of things. And ultimately all this is so important because you're trying to get the closest thing you can to a replica of Robertson, so there's no major kind of impact on Liverpool's performances when Robertson isn't playing.
Yeah, I mean, I must say he is really, really similar to Robertson in a number of areas. I'd say he's a lot more like Robertson than Trent. I think we're going to get into the numbers now, but in terms of, I've always viewed Trent as a bit more of a passer, and Robertson's more of a runner. And I think Tsimikas is more in the Robertson mould. In terms of his passing range and stuff like that, and his execution and stuff, maybe not anywhere near as developed as Trent, to be honest, but in terms of his energy up and down the flank and stuff like that, and particularly his dribbling, which we're going to get to, Tsimikas edges him out. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how he does. But in terms of numbers, so I picked up on a variety of different aspects, covered a few of them in the newsletter. So for those who are listening on the podcast, apologies because I'm going to share the screen. But this was sent as part of the newsletter. So if you receive the newsletter, you'll know what it is. It's his dribbling numbers in comparison to Europe's best, or Europe's most familiar, really. So what I did was there was about, I think, 160 fullbacks in Europe's top 5 leagues this season who've played at least 1,500 minutes in their domestic league. So just to see how Tsimikas, performed in comparison to them in the Greek league, I just moved Tsimikas over into the sample of European players. So obviously there's the massive caveat of Tsimikas playing in the Greek league. It's a poor quality league. These numbers might take a hit when he comes to play in the Premier League, whatever. But that is how he performs for dribbles completed per 90 in comparison to players from Europe. So as you can see, top of the whole of Europe fullbacks was Alphonso Davies, unsurprisingly, with 3.5 dribbles completed per 90. if Tsimikas had played in Europe and posted the exact same numbers he did in the Greek league, he'd actually be second, which I think is quite crazy, with 3.4 dribbles completed per 90. And just for a bit of perspective on that, for those that can't see this, it will be on YouTube if you want to go and check it. Jamal Lewis placed 24th, Ricardo Pereira 25th, Kyle Walker 68th, Ben Chilwell 79th, Andy Robertson, interestingly, 87th, and since Alexander-Arnold, who I've just said, is more of a passer than a runner, 115th. But I mean, I'm not sure how impressed to be by that, considering the Greek league. But that is quite notable, isn't it, Dave?
It is, yeah. And what I would say is as well, I'm just bringing this up to double check it, but there's one important thing to really consider. There he is, yeah. So obviously, yeah, he is playing in the Greek league, as we know. But that being said, he's played in the Champions League. He's played in European competition. He's played against really good sides. Now, and Minamino will also done the same. And I just wonder if maybe Liverpool kind of see how they perform in this competition against elite opposition, and potentially think, they play well. Numbers are good in these games. These players have potential to adapt against better sides in a tougher composition. I did know, I saw on Twitter earlier, but I haven't checked it myself, so I hate doing this, but I think it's really good in sharing. Apologies, I don't know who shared it, but apparently he come out as the second best defender in the Champions League this season for shot creating actions per 90, which isn't bad. And admittedly, that sample size is going to be fairly small, but it does show that, he can adapt his game against much better sides. So although you are rightly caveating those numbers in terms of, it's in the Greek league, it's not again in one of the top 5 divisions, it does show that when he comes up against these teams, he does seem to be able to size up, and he does seem to be able to translate them into better against better opponents, which I think is good news for Liverpool.
Yeah, I actually saw that tweet myself.
Do you know what it was?
No, I can't remember who was top either. If he was second for shot creating actions, I can't remember who was top.
Apologies, if it was you, send us a message on Twitter and we'll give you a shout out next week.
Yeah, but it's interesting though. I mean, I don't think he takes set pieces for Olympiacos. Maybe he'll be doing a little bit more of that at Liverpool, considering the responsibility of the fullbacks. But yeah, it was certainly an interesting to see when I saw it. I didn't check it myself, but if that's true, considering who he was playing for, it is interesting. So another aspect that we looked at on the newsletter was, I think this is crossing. Dave mentioned earlier about his crossing. Again, he shows up, very active in comparison to Europe's best. Again, if you haven't seen this is from the newsletter. If you're looking at this and liking the look of it, sign up to the newsletter, because this is the kind of stuff that we're regularly sending out on your emails free of charge. But yeah, that's how he compares to the sample of European fullbacks for crosses completed in 90. As you can see, Jesus Navas is currently converted to a fullback, actually, is top. Since Alexander-Arnold second, and Tsimikas would be 5th if the Greek Super League was in the top 5 European. Again, impressive. And the lad who's 6th, actually, on that list, Sergio Reguilon, I think it is, or Reguilon, or he was actually another player on the Liverpool shortlist. Liverpool apparently had a shortlist of 4 players for this left back slot, and I think Reguilon was one of them. So as you can see, he's completing exactly the same number of crosses per 90 as Tsimikas. Robertson a little bit lower in 13th overall. Lucas Digne, you can see there, Dave, Everton player. I actually thought Lucas Digne would be a bit higher, to be honest.
Yeah, so did I actually, but clearly not.
Yeah, Alphonso Davies is there, but a lot further down, 28th. Sergio Aurier, 72nd. And Luke Shaw, quite surprisingly, who you'd probably perceive as quite an attacking fullback, 122nd. I mean, United don't have particularly, much of an aerial threat in the box, but 0.6 crosses completed per 90 by Luke Shaw isn't very much. But yeah, Tsimikas 5th in Europe for crosses completed per 90. So we have a dribbler, which Trent isn't, and which Robertson isn't. But we also have a crosser. So I think it's just a bit of a combo there that we don't actually have at the minute. But there's this rumour that, Klopp doesn't like dribblers and stuff like that, and maybe he'll knock that out of his game. But at the same time, Klopp's always been really good at recognising what a player's good at and just letting them play, just letting them do what he's good at. So it'll be interesting to see if Tsimikas' dribbling comes down, but certainly his crossing there, I'd expect that to either stay the same or if not, receive a bit of a boost.
Yeah, it is interesting that when a player's got such a, is really performing so well in a particular department, it seems crazy to nullify the same, But then, if you think of Liverpool midfield, someone like Ronaldo, he can do so much, but I guess he plays within himself, doesn't he? Within the midfield to kind of fit the wider team and a wider goal, I guess. So maybe it may be kind of nullified, but I don't know. I feel like in those wing back areas, being able to dribble with the ball, providing you're not doing it, on the edge of your own half and potentially putting the side at risk to a dangerous counter. I think it's a positive asset to have. So it will be interesting to see if that kind of maintains when he starts playing next season.
Yeah, and then the final one that we created for the newsletter was, I probably should have done progressive runs, to be honest, but we'll do that in a sec in terms of talking about it. But passes into the box, hopefully you can see that.
Excuse me. Yeah. Well, it's just coming up now. I've got it.
Yeah, so in terms of that, obviously he's not as high, but still within touching distance of being, quite clearly applicable to a Liverpool fullback. As you can see, Jesus Navas is again top with 3.3 completed passes into the box per 90. Trent second, Kieran Trippier fourth, Andy Robertson 9th, and Tsimikas 21st. Which again not bad considering there's about 160 fullbacks in the sample. For a bit of perspective on that, Danny Carvajal is 25th, Sergio Aurier 47th, Kyle Walker 89th, and Aaron Wan-Bissaka 113th. So yeah, so I think that's interesting, by the way, that United have got two fullbacks there in the hundreds for crosses completed on the last viz that we showed, and then passing into the box on the opposite flank, you got your right back in the hundreds. So I think United are completely opposite end of Liverpool when it comes to attacking through your fullbacks or attacking through your midfield. I think they're literally polar opposites.
Yeah, well, what's happened with them, isn't it? They've gone so top heavy with the quality attackers that if wing backs were constantly bombing on and they have nothing left to, defensively, would they? So that kind of, I suppose, that makes some sense. But it's interesting, we're talking about him here, and he's shown up really well in a fair few important departments for the position. And okay, you say things like 21st, which isn't bad, but if you're consistently in the top 10-15% of each of these departments, then chances are you're a really good player. It's right. It's no point being in the top 2 or 3 if you're going to be like ranking, somewhere halfway down in the other areas. We're talking about a player, as I said, who's probably in around the top 15% in each of those departments that you just mentioned that were in the newsletter there, which to me kind of pieces together a really good player.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I kind of summarised with for the newsletter was, the fact that he'll basically be coming in and be asked to do virtually everything he's been doing anyway for the past year or so. There shouldn't be any real, massive acclimatization. Like I think with Fabinho, for example, when we got Fabinho in, there was a bit of an adjustment period because he had to go from working in a midfield 2 to working in a midfield 3, often as the lone defensive midfielder. So there's a bit of a learning period there. With this lad coming in, considering the numbers that we've just shown, what he's doing and that, how attacking he is. If Liverpool's usual 10 players are on the field and you take Robertson out and put Tsimikas in, Liverpool should perform virtually the same. You should be able to perform exactly as before, just as attacking with a left back who's very energetic, offering all kinds of different threats in the final third and that sort of stuff.
That's basically the crux of a piece that I wrote yesterday for Liverpool.com. It was basically that. I looked at 2 games specifically. I tried to pick 2 games where it was, the same environments, same venue against similar opposition. And the best 2 examples I could find was Bournemouth at home in March and Crystal Palace just after the restart. Both Liverpool home games against sides who are perceived lesser sides in the division. One of them, James Milner started, and the other, Robertson was back in the side for the Palace game. And I think you really got an indication, if you just looked at the numbers and the visualizations he used in that, just how much it does impact Liverpool's all-round kind of dynamics, the equilibrium across the team. Milner's a great all-around, and he comes in and certainly defensively, I think he does well, and he's a decent player to plug a hole. But the attack seems to be lopsided more to the right. The threat in general down the left changes. I think Mane, his role adapts a little bit to try and overcompensate. But then, when Robertson is inside, it's completely different. And as you've just said there, you're basically bringing in a version of the same player. He mightn't be as good, but he's certainly, similar enough that the side is going to maintain that balance, which on the whole shouldn't impact Liverpool's performances, and you'll be able to keep, at that really high standard every game, even if you do have to drop one of the players. And I think the idea, hopefully, for Liverpool is, from their point of view, that they want to try and do that in other areas of the pitch as well. But the left back was one of the most important this summer, and it looks as if they've addressed it with a perfect candidate.
Yeah, it's spot on. I think that's one of my biggest frustrations with Liverpool over the years has been, when the usual 11 isn't playing, the team can't attack in the same way because they haven't got the same backups, basically. So if Milner comes in for Robertson, it changes the way Liverpool attack. If, Origi comes in or Ox comes in for Salah, changes the way we attack, all that sort of stuff. So I think it's quite interesting that Liverpool have signed, not necessarily a carbon copy, but someone who's really, really similar to Robertson to play left back. I think we also signed Minamino in January, who you could argue is one of the very, very few out there who is at least vaguely comparable to Firmino in terms of being able to play as the 9 and drop off. So I think Liverpool are somehow, really shrewdly identifying like almost bargain versions of their actual 11.
It feels like they're building their own kind of team of regens on Football Manager. Just kind of players who they can replicate of this mold.
Yeah, it feels a little like those who listen to this podcast every week will know that during lockdown we created an alternative Liverpool 11, and we wanted that 11 to perform exactly how Liverpool do in terms of the same threats and the same type of build-up and the same type of attack and all that sort of stuff. If Liverpool's current 11 didn't exist, it is a little bit like Liverpool are now starting to do that for almost like a bit of a shadow squad for the actual first 11. Minamino in the Firmino mould, Tsimikas in the Robertson mould, Nico Williams in the Trent mould, all that sort of stuff. I think you can play any one of the midfielders really, and you'll get a decent level of output there. I think the main issue probably is an alternative for Salah. I think that's really tricky, especially when he's left-footed. And a better alternative for Mane, other than Origi, because I don't think Origi offers the same threat. He's not quick enough and stuff, and not that direct enough and things. But I think it really is interesting the way Liverpool are going down the route of that whole shadow squad thing. Trying another group of players behind the first teamers who are cheaper, maybe not as good, but still perform in the same way, still offer the same threats and things.
Yeah, it's probably the ideal way to prepare and execute, a transition phase that maybe might come in the next couple of seasons. Where you get, you got these players who can come in, perform at similar levels as maybe the regulars that we've become accustomed to aren't as available as much anymore, or maybe if. I mean, I don't anticipate this. I'm just using it as an example. Maybe if Robertson was sold, you haven't suddenly got a panic of trying to find a player who can come in and without it kind of impacting the side. You've got the player there. Then I think it'll really aid the up and coming transition phase, which will probably come in the next year or two for Klopp.
Yeah, well, that's what the best clubs usually do. The smartest clubs usually recruit in advance in anticipation of a sale. If you think of, for example, Leicester, who have done it really, really well in the past few years, obviously they were linked with Tsimikas as well. But you think when they sold Harry Maguire, they bought Soyuncu 12 months earlier because they kind of knew it was going to get to a point where United were going to come from Maguire. They're trying to sign Tsimikas there in anticipation of Chilwell leaving. And maybe this summer we'll see them target quite an attacking midfielder in anticipation of Maddison maybe leaving further down the line. But yeah, I don't think Liverpool have to do it as much, considering Liverpool are a bit more of a bit higher in the food chain to be at risk of losing all the best players. But if you can do it and it allows you to rotate without the performance suffering, and without having to change everything to accommodate the new players you've just introduced, it makes sense. One more aspect of his game, according to the numbers that I picked up on, that I didn't create a visualization for, was progressive runs. So a progressive run is basically, when the player's got the ball at his feet and he carries it forward into space closer to the opponent's goal. I don't mean 2 yards. I mean, say for example, a 5-yard carry or a 10-yard carry or so. Players that complete lots of carries are usually more dynamic in the way that they play. I think top of the Premier League this season was, I'm not sure who it was, but I think Grealish is usually up there. Ben Chilwell's usually up there. Williams usually up there. Just players who like to drive forward with the ball. I think in the Greek Super League, Tsimikas averaged, I think, 3.1 per 90. Robertson, 3 per 90. So again, just very, very similar. The whole similar players concept, it's probably being applied, to be honest. Another little note, no injury history, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, I saw that myself.
I actually Googled it because I didn't believe it. And it said he did pick up one injury, funnily enough, when he was about to be called up to the country to play for Greece. So he missed the 2 Greek matches, which tends to happen, doesn't it? But in terms of missing matches for Olympiacos, at least, he hasn't been kept out, which is probably an underrated aspect of scouting that Liverpool probably consider, and some of the clubs probably don't.
Yeah, I found that myself. I looked on transfer market and I was like, I thought they've made an error clearly, but yeah, there's absolutely people should go on there and have a look if they don't believe us. It's quite funny. There's nothing on there. Just something I wanted to add quickly, Josh. We were talking about that adaptation to a more dominant side a little bit earlier. I was just as we were chatting there, I was having a quick look at the Super League, the Greek Super League, and in many ways, Olympiacos are the kind of Liverpool of that division. I don't know the intricacies of the actual tactical dynamics, but they scored the most goals last season. Okay, in the Premier League, you've got more than one dominant side. So you've got Man City as well, but scored the most goals last season, highest XG. They tend to rank fairly high up as well in terms of, or low, sorry, in terms of PPDA. In terms of ball possession as well, they had the highest average ball possession last year. There's a lot of, they're the dominant side in that division. Liverpool are one of the dominant sides in this division as well. So he probably will have, although it'll be against lesser sides, he will have been accustomed to being on the side who's expected to go out there and obviously win games and control matches.
Yeah, no, it's definitely an underrated aspect of recruitment, signing a player from an environment with a view to bringing them to Liverpool where the environment isn't that different. I think, say for example, United buying Wan-Bissaka, which is again another little note that I made in the newsletter. It's a deal Liverpool would have never done, and the reason he would have never done it is because in the space of a few months, Wan-Bissaka's going from being a defensive fullback and in basically a low block for Roy Hodgson to playing 60 yards from goal on the halfway line at Old Trafford when you've got 65% of the ball. It's a completely different game, and he's having to really learn on the job sort of thing and adjust and all that sort of stuff. Whereas, Minamino coming from one of the Red Bull clubs, pressing and all that sort of stuff. Tsimikas coming from, as you say, a dominant attacking outfit in Olympiacos. It just makes sense to ensure that. I think it minimises the risk. I think that's the key thing. I think it minimises the chance of a player coming to Liverpool or coming to a new league or whatever and encountering problems. I think if you can keep as many things the same, if you can keep the platform for why the player succeeded in his previous club, there's no reason why he shouldn't do it in the new club. I think Liverpool have been really good at doing that.
I mean, at very least, even if you've got an expert talent who will be able to grow into how that club plays eventually, it at very least limits that transition period, doesn't it? Just makes it so much quicker for them to hit the ground running.
Yeah. But the thing is, even with that, Liverpool still give the player a transition period whereby we don't usually see them for about 3 months.
True.
So yeah, I mentioned earlier about the defensive numbers and didn't even say them. So I'll mention that now. This was not including Europe. This was only the Greek Super League. There was 31 fullbacks who played over 1,000. It was either 1,000 or 1,500 minutes. And Tsimikas ranked 5th for defensive duel success. I think he wins about 65% of his duels. And in terms of aerial success, he was 14th, so about mid-table there. So I think that the way I basically sum it up is on the defensive side, he's fine. Defensive numbers can be a little bit, weird every now and then, and his defensive approach will be different at Liverpool, I assume. Maybe those numbers improve, but maybe they'll decrease going up against better dribblers and stuff like that. Even though he did well against the Dynamo Traore, but yeah, I think on the defensive side, I'm not concerned really. The way Moreno suffered because he didn't have that defensive game. I think Tsimikas does seem to have that to him. I think one of the reasons that we actually got the deal for only 11 million was he only had actually 2 years remaining on his deal. I think that comes into it. I think Lewis had a little bit longer. But yeah, I think unless there's anything else you want to cover regarding Tsimikas, Dave, pretty much mentioned all the key points there, I think.
I think we probably, obviously, I don't know, we did mention it right at the top, but he's a good age as well. It might seem something small, but I think 24 is a good age where, you're not the one who has to kind of develop him through his learning period. Chances are he's probably hitting the level that he's going to be at now as a player. I'm not saying there won't be improvements. I'm sure there will as he really goes and hits those peak years. But brought him at a really good age where hopefully any kind of errors or steep learning curves has been done at Olympiacos, and now he's at Liverpool where he can kind of be the player that they need. And there might be some money to be made when they eventually sell him as well in maybe 4 or 5 years time, all being well.
Yeah, I mean he should technically be entering his prime really. I think it's interesting that Liverpool give him a 5-year deal, because obviously when that runs out he'll be about 29 years old, and Wijnaldum is currently 29 I think, and he's got 1 year left on his deal, so I think Liverpool tend to give these players deals that run up until around the age of 30, and then at 30 they kind of reassess basically whether they're worth keeping or whether they should be sold or let go for free like Lallana maybe, or something like that. Even though Lallana was kept till about the age of, I think he's about 33 or something, Lallana.
What was Lallana? Oh,
I'm going to say 32, but not too sure.
I mean, it's not that I'm milking this here, aren't I? But I clicked off me Google by mistake. Oh yeah, good shout, 32.
Yeah, so I think Lallana's deal was a bit earlier. I can't remember when he signed that, but it might have been a little bit at the start of Klopp's tenure and stuff like that. Liverpool are still refining everything. But yeah, I mean, we were going to mention about what's next for Liverpool, but I think maybe we can leave it there and just dedicate this podcast to Tsimikas, really. New Liverpool signing, only the second that's happened since this podcast has been going. So yeah, hopefully we've provided a bit of background on there, offered a bit of insight into what to expect, why it seems to be a good deal and all that sort of stuff. If we spot anything else on him, we will talk about it. Give us a shout if you want us to talk about anything ahead of next week. And yeah, sign up to Analysing Anfield and also Analytics 5, Dave. Not sure if there's anything you want to plug before we round up.
Yeah, so it looks like we've had a few subscriptions through the show, so thank you for those who have signed up. But obviously, it's going to be stuff from me and Josh. It's not just going to be Liverpool focused. So if you've got an interest in kind of wider football, then definitely do sign up. You can get the link through my Twitter. I've just put it in my Twitter bio now at @Hughes_. But yeah, we just look at different tactical and analytical aspects of the game, from around the world and around Europe. We seem to do a mini series each week, and it's just 5 little parts on that series each week, and people seem to be really enjoying it. So do sign up. Goes without saying, it's completely free. Don't even need your name or anything. Just pop an email in, and that'll be you registered, and you'll get it in your inbox Monday to Friday. So hopefully a few years you'll enjoying what you're seeing on Analysing Anfield newsletter. I'm sure you are. If you're keen for a little bit more that kind of stuff, then make sure you sign up to Analytics 5 as well.
Yeah, nice one. So we'll leave it there then. So thanks for tuning in. Thanks for joining us, Dave. And we will be back next week. See you later.